Have you ever looked at someone who seems to be absolutely crushing it in life? The kind of person who's always juggling a mountain of tasks, nailing every goal, and making it look effortless? They're the ones who seem almost superhuman, right? But here's the twist that nobody talks about. That relentless drive, the one that keeps them hustling, thriving, and achieving, can sometimes backfire. It's like pouring fuel on a fire. The same energy that rockets them to the top can also leave them running on empty. And we're not talking about just needing a lazy weekend. No, this is about burnout. A point where your body and mind hit a wall so hard that you're unsure if you'll ever get back up. If you're reading this, you're probably familiar with that high-achieving mindset. Maybe it's your own story, or maybe it's someone you know. Either way, stick around. In this post, we're going to dive deep into the psychology of burnout, reveal why high achievers are more vulnerable to it, and, most importantly, offer some strategies to keep your drive alive without burning out. What is burnout? Before we explore why high achievers are more prone to burnout, let's start with the basics. What exactly is burnout? It's not just feeling tired, stressed, or frustrated after a rough day. Burnout is a complex psychological state, and it goes deeper than ordinary fatigue or stress. Burnout is what happens when stress becomes your default setting. It's a chronic, multi-layered response to feeling stretched too thin for too long, and it affects you in three core ways. Number 1. Overwhelming exhaustion. This is tiredness on another level. It's that bone-deep fatigue that doesn't disappear, no matter how much you rest or try to recharge. Tasks that used to feel effortless now feel twice as hard. The energy you once had is gone, replaced by a sluggish feeling that won't go away. Number 2. Emotional detachment. The things that used to fire you up, those projects or goals that fueled you, start to feel meaningless. This is more than just a bad mood. It's a disconnect. It feels like you're going through the motions without really being there. Your passion fades, and with it, the sense of purpose you once felt. Number 3. Feeling ineffective. You're working hard, but it feels like you're barely making a dent. Productivity slips, and your usual output now feels like an uphill battle. You're putting in the hours, but the satisfaction that used to follow just isn't there. Put these together, and you have burnout. It's not just physical or mental. It's an all-encompassing, life-altering experience that drains your body, mind, and spirit. And while anyone can experience burnout, high achievers, those go-getters who seem unstoppable, are actually more susceptible. But why? Why high achievers are more vulnerable to burnout? High achievers, the people who live for goals, who work harder than anyone else in the room, who constantly push themselves to new limits, face burnout at a higher rate. Studies suggest they're up to 20% more likely to experience burnout than the average person. Here's why. Number 1. Taking on more than they can handle. High achievers are the masters of saying yes to everything. They're the ones who volunteer for the extra project at work, start a side hustle, and take on additional commitments at home. But here's the thing. They don't just aim to complete these tasks. They push themselves to exceed expectations every single time. Imagine the life of a high-level executive who's not only running a department, but also volunteering on boards, coaching their kids' soccer team, and taking on public speaking engagements. Their calendar is packed to the brim, with barely any space to breathe. The responsibilities pile up, and slowly, that load becomes overwhelming. And here's where it gets risky. They rarely set boundaries. They think, I can handle it. But when the burnout finally hits, it hits hard. Pro tip: setting boundaries isn't about doing less. It's about choosing where to focus your energy. High achievers who learn to prioritize and occasionally say no are better able to manage the long game. Number 2, the perfectionism trap. Perfectionism is often seen as a strength, but for high achievers, it can be a heavy burden. They're not just aiming to do their best, they're aiming to do it perfectly. Every single time. But here's the problem. Perfectionism is an impossible standard, and it's never satisfied. Think of a software developer who spends hours tweaking every line of code, even when it's already good enough. They're constantly looking for flaws, never quite happy with the outcome, and mentally exhausted from the pursuit of perfect. Perfectionism doesn't just add work, it amplifies stress. Every little mistake feels monumental, like a personal failure, and over time, this self-imposed pressure builds up. Pro tip: the key to overcoming perfectionism isn't lowering your standards, it's being kinder to yourself. Aim for excellence, but let go of the need for flawlessness. Number 3, the loneliness of high expectations. High achievers often feel a unique kind of loneliness. It's hard to find people who really understand the intensity of their goals and the pressure they're under. They're surrounded by people but can feel isolated because not everyone shares their drive. Take, for instance, a startup founder working day and night to get their company off the ground. They're surrounded by friends and colleagues, but none really grasp the weight of the founder's vision. This isolation creates an emotional gap, making burnout more likely. Pro tip: build a support network of like-minded people, mentors, or even fellow high achievers who get it. Surrounding yourself with people who understand your journey can reduce the loneliness and provide much-needed perspective. Number 4, the reluctance to say no. High achievers have a hard time saying no. Every opportunity feels like a potential win, and turning something down feels like giving up. Saying yes becomes almost automatic. But taking on more than they can realistically handle creates an overwhelming workload that spirals out of control. Consider a lawyer who's already overloaded with cases, but agrees to take on one more because, well, it feels like an opportunity they can't refuse. Before long, they're juggling so much that there's no time to rest. Each new yes is a brick in the wall of burnout. Pro tip: practice saying no by setting clear priorities. You don't need to seize every opportunity to prove your worth. Sometimes, protecting your energy is the ultimate power move. Number 5, the fear of failure. For high achievers, failure is more than just missing a goal. It feels personal, almost like an attack on their identity. To avoid it, they push themselves to the limit, often working harder and faster, even when they're exhausted. Picture a top student who's terrified of getting anything less than an A. They work late into the night, sacrificing sleep and social time. The relentless drive to avoid failure isn't sustainable, and sooner or later, burnout catches up. Pro tip: redefine what failure means. Instead of seeing it as an attack on your worth, view it as part of the growth process. It's okay to stumble. You're still moving forward. Number 6, the need for external validation. High achievers often thrive on praise and recognition. Approval from others can feel like the fuel they need to keep going. But this constant need for validation creates a cycle of stress. Each achievement is quickly followed by the need for another to keep the praise coming. Consider a sales manager who's not pushing for higher numbers because they need the money, but because they crave praise from their boss. They push harder with each success, finding it harder to stop because the validation is addicting. Pro tip: shift from external to internal validation. Find satisfaction in your own progress, regardless of what others think. This helps you create a sustainable sense of achievement. Number 7, struggling with boundaries. High achievers are notorious for blurring the lines between work and personal life. They bring work home, check emails at midnight, and think about projects on weekends. This lack of boundaries leaves them on all the time, with no real chance to recharge. Imagine an entrepreneur who's answering emails at dinner or brainstorming ideas late at night. There's no time to reset, and eventually they burn out because they're constantly pushing with no time to rest. Pro tip: setting firm boundaries between work and personal time isn't a weakness. It's an investment in your long-term success. Take breaks, disconnect, and give yourself permission to recharge. Protect your drive without losing your edge. Burnout is real, and it's surprisingly common among high achievers. But success should never come at the cost of your well-being. Balancing ambition with self-care is an ongoing journey, one that every high achiever needs to prioritize to truly thrive. If you're someone who's always striving, remember this: the ultimate win is not just about hitting every goal. It's about maintaining your health, happiness, and energy along the way. Don't let burnout rob you of your passion and purpose. Want to keep your drive alive without burning out? Check out our next video on Top 10 Habits of High Achievers to Prevent Burnout.